the Duke never noticed her tears. Until there was no one left to hide them. A true story of silent love, invisible pain, and the moment a man finally opened his eyes. Every morning, Eleanor Voss woke up before the sun. Not because she had to. Not because anyone asked her to. She woke up early because those first quiet minutes, before the estate stirred, before the footsteps began on the floor above, before the day required her to be anything for anyone, were the only minutes that were completely her own. She would go downstairs to the large kitchen, fill the kettle, and stand at the window while it boiled. Outside, the grounds of Ashmore stretched wide and still in the gray morning light. The old oak near the gate stood the way it always stood, unmoved, patient, rooted deep in something nobody could see. Eleanor sometimes thought she understood that tree very well. She had lived at Ashmore for 7 years. 7 years of that kitchen, those mornings, that view. She had come here as a young woman of 27, bright-eyed and quietly in love with a man who had looked at her, really looked at her, as though she were the most interesting thing in any room she walked into. His name was Edward Calloway. He was the Duke of Ashmore. And he had, once upon a time, made Eleanor feel like she mattered in a way she had never been able to explain to anyone, not even herself. That feeling had not disappeared overnight. That was the hard thing about it. It had gone slowly, like water draining from a bathtub, quietly, steadily, until one day she looked around and found that what had once been full was now almost empty, and she could not point to the exact moment it had begun to drain. She had not told anyone. That was the other hard thing. Edward was not a cruel man. Eleanor had always been clear about that, even in her most painful moments. He was intelligent, well-read, and deeply committed to the responsibilities that came with his name and his land. He ran the estate with great care. He showed up to every meeting, every obligation, every duty that was placed before him. He was a man who kept his word. But somewhere along the way, in the middle of all that responsibility, Eleanor had stopped being someone he paid attention to and had become something he simply relied upon. Like the house itself. Like the furniture. She was there, she was steady, she was fine, and because she was always fine, he never thought to ask. Eleanor's fine, he would say to his friends, easily, with a small laugh. You know how she is. She's solid. Solid. She had heard that word so many times. She understood that he meant it as a compliment. She understood that he said it with affection. But there is a great difference between being loved and being taken for granted, and Eleanor had learned, slowly and painfully, that it is possible to be both at the same time. It was never one big thing. That is what she would have told you, if you had asked. It was always the small things. It was the dinner party where Edward told the story of their holiday in Portugal, a charming story, a funny story, but he told it slightly wrong. He said she had ordered the fish. She had ordered the lamb. It was a small error. Nobody at the table noticed or cared. But Eleanor noticed. She always noticed. She smiled and said nothing, and later that night, in the bathroom with the shower running, she let herself cry for 3 minutes, then turned off the water and went to bed. It was the evening she had been upset about a difficult week at work. She was a conservation architect, and a project she had spent 4 months on had fallen through, and she had tried, carefully, to tell him about it over dinner. He had listened for a moment. Then his phone had lit up on the table and he had glanced at it, and glanced again, and eventually excused himself to take the call. When he came back, they talked about the call instead. Her week was not mentioned again. It was their anniversary dinner, their 7th year, at a beautiful restaurant he had chosen with real thought and care. He gave her a bracelet, elegant, expensive, lovely. She thanked him. She meant it. But during the meal, she counted quietly to herself, he had not asked her a single question about her life all evening. Not one. He had talked, enthusiastically, warmly, about the estate, about a new development he was working on, about an old friend who had called. She had listened, and offered the right words at the right moments, and the evening had gone well by every measure that mattered to an outside observer. In the restaurant bathroom, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She looked like a woman who had been holding her breath for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to exhale. She loved him. She was also disappearing. Both things were true. Her oldest friend was a woman named Rosie, who lived in Sheffield and had known Eleanor since they were 14 years old and sitting next to each other in a geography lesson that neither of them could remember a word of. Rosie was the kind of person who asked direct questions and then waited, really waited, for the answer. Eleanor had always found this quality both comforting and slightly terrifying. One weekend, while Edward was away at a conference, Eleanor visited Rosie. They sat in Rosie's small, warm kitchen on a Friday night with a bottle of wine between them and the sound of rain on the window, and for a while they talked about everything and nothing the way old friends do, easy, wandering conversation that felt like putting on a comfortable coat. Then Rosie set down her glass, looked at Eleanor, and said, "When was the last time Edward asked how you were?" Properly asked, and then stopped talking and waited for the answer. Eleanor opened her mouth. She was ready to answer. She was sure she had an answer. But then she sat there with her mouth slightly open and no words coming out, because she was searching through her memory, through 7 years of mornings and evenings and dinners and conversations, and she could not find what she was looking for. She laughed instead. It was the wrong kind of laugh, the kind that slides sideways toward something you are not ready to face. She changed the subject. Rosie let her. That night, alone in Rosie's spare room, Eleanor cried in a way she had not allowed herself to cry in a very long time. Not the quiet, careful kind, not the 3-minute bathroom kind, but the full kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and takes something out of you when it goes. She pressed her face into the pillow and she let it come. In the morning, she washed her face, came downstairs, and Rosie made her eggs without saying a word about it. That was also why Eleanor loved her. She did not make a decision all at once. That is not how these things happen. She made it in pieces, slowly, over the months that followed. First, she opened a bank account of her own. She did not mention it to Edward. Second, she took a work contract in London, a genuine opportunity, a building that needed her, and told Edward it would be a few months. He said that was fine. He said it too easily, she thought. Too quickly. As though the prospect of her absence did not require a second thought. She moved her things into a small flat in Islington, belonging to a friend who was away for 6 months. The flat was nothing like Ashmore. It was small and slightly drafty and the kitchen window looked out onto a brick wall. She loved it immediately. She loved it in a way she could not fully explain. She slept well there. That was the first thing she noticed. She slept properly, deeply, without the quiet background feeling of waiting for something. She had not even been aware that feeling was there until it was gone. She walked along the canal on Sunday mornings with a coffee in her hand and felt, gradually and cautiously, like herself again. She had been so careful for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like not to be. Edward's sister, Charlotte, called her one evening out of the blue. They had always gotten along, 2 women who might have been close friends in a different life. Charlotte did not say she was calling about Edward. She called just to talk, which is what made the conversation feel safe, and real, and ultimately the most honest one Eleanor had in a long time. Near the end of the call, Charlotte said quietly, "He misses you, you know. In his way. I don't think he knows how to say it." Eleanor looked at the wall of her small flat. "I know," she said. "He's not the easiest person to reach," Charlotte continued. "He never has been. Our father was the same way. They build these walls without ever meaning to, and then they seem surprised when no one can get through." "I tried," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. "I tried for a long time. I don't think he ever knew I was trying." Silence on the line. Then Charlotte said softly, "No. I don't think he did." It was a simple exchange. But something about being heard, properly heard, by someone who understood the situation made Eleanor feel less alone than she had in years. She sat with the phone in her hand after the call ended and thought about all the versions of herself she had been over the last 7 years. The bright-eyed one. The hopeful one. The patient one. The one who cried in bathrooms. The one walking along the canal on Sunday mornings, slowly finding her way back. She drove to Ashmore on a Thursday afternoon in October. The trees along the drive had turned gold and copper, and the light was that particular autumn light that makes everything look important. Eleanor parked the car, sat for a moment, then went inside. Edward was in his study. When he looked up and saw her in the doorway, his face changed, briefly, quickly, and she caught a glimpse of the man she had first fallen in love with. The one who had looked at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room. That man was still in there. She had always known that. It did not make any of this easier. She sat down across from him. She had not prepared a speech. She had decided, some time ago, that she did not want a speech. She wanted to be honest, clearly, simply, without drama. I have been unhappy for a long time, she said. Not every day. Not in every moment. But underneath everything, for a long time, there has been a sadness that I kept putting away because I didn't want to burden you with it, or make things difficult, or seem like someone who complained. She paused. I think that was a mistake. I think I should have said it sooner. But I also think that when I tried to say it, in smaller ways, you weren't listening. And I kept telling myself that was okay. But it wasn't. Edward sat very still. She could see something working behind his eyes. I didn't know, he said finally. I know you didn't, she said. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. I did, she said, quietly. You just never heard it. He did not argue. That surprised her. He sat with those words, she could see him sitting with them, and he did not try to defend himself or explain himself or turn it around. He just let them be true. That, she thought, was perhaps the first real thing that had passed between them in years. She left before dinner. She drove back to London in the dark, and the motorway lights blurred past, and she did not cry. She had, she thought, cried everything that needed to come out. What remained inside her now felt different. Not happy, not yet. But clear. Wide open and clear, like a room after all the old furniture has been moved out and the windows have been thrown open and the light is coming in. Ashmore was very quiet after she left. Edward had always thought of himself as someone who was comfortable with quiet. He had grown up in large, silent houses where feelings were rarely spoken out loud and composure was considered a virtue. He had spent his whole life learning to be steady, unmoved, reliable, just like his father, and his father's father before him. But the quiet that settled over the estate after Eleanor's visit was a different kind of quiet. It had weight. It had a shape. He would walk through a room and be aware, in a way he had never been before, that something was missing from it, not a thing, but a presence. The way a room feels different when the light changes. He found a hairpin on the kitchen windowsill. Small, silver, ordinary. He picked it up and held it in his palm. He had no memory of ever noticing it before, though it had clearly been there for weeks. He stood at that windowsill for a long time. He called his oldest friend, Marcus, that evening. Marcus listened, really listened, without interrupting, and at the end of it said, "Did you ever ask her what she needed? Not what she wanted, not what would make things convenient, but what she actually needed." Edward thought about it. He tried to remember specific times, specific conversations. "I thought I knew," he said. "That's not the same thing," Marcus said. "No," Edward thought. "It is not." He wrote her a letter. Not an email. A letter by hand, on paper, because it felt important to do it in a way that was slow and deliberate and could not be dashed off between two other things. He sat at his desk for a very long time, and he wrote, and crossed out, and wrote again. He did not ask her to come back. He was clear about that with himself before he began. He did not want to write something that was really just about what he wanted. He wanted, for perhaps the first time, to write something that was about her. He wrote, "I have spent a long time thinking about what you said, and about what I said, which was very little. I have spent a long time thinking about the kind of man I have been, not in the big moments, but in the ordinary ones. And what I have come to understand is that I was not paying attention. Not to you, not to the quiet ways you were telling me something was wrong, not to the gap between the woman you were becoming and the woman I assumed you still were. I am sorry. Not in the way people are sorry when they want something from the apology. Just sorry, plainly and fully sorry, that someone I love was lonely inside our life together, and I was too comfortable to notice." He posted it. He did not call to say it was coming. He did not follow up with a message to ask if she had received it. He simply sent it, and let it be what it was. Eleanor read the letter at her kitchen table in Islington on a Wednesday morning, with autumn light coming through the window and a cup of tea going cold beside her. She read it once. Then she made a fresh cup of tea and read it again. Then she sat with it in her hands for a while. It was a good letter. It was honest and it was humble and it did not ask anything of her, which was, she thought, the most honest thing about it. She thought about the man who had written it, the one she had seen in the doorway of his study, the one she had first loved, and she felt both the warmth of that love and the sadness of everything that had come between it and now. Both feelings were real. Both feelings were hers. She put the letter in the drawer of her bedside table. She did not throw it away. 6 months later, Eleanor was working on a church restoration in Bath, her favorite kind of project, the kind where something old and worn and full of history was being carefully brought back to life. She was good at this work. She had always been good at it. She simply, for a while, had stopped treating her own talent as something that deserved to come first. She and Edward met for coffee in London on a Saturday in March. Neutral ground. A small cafe near the river. There was no dramatic scene. Nobody said anything they would look back on as a turning point. They sat across from each other and were simply two people being honest, which, Eleanor reflected, was something they had perhaps never quite managed to do while they were living together. Edward asked how she was. She told him, properly, fully, the way she had not let herself speak in a long time. He listened. He did not look at his phone. He did not steer the conversation elsewhere. He just listened. Then he asked about the church in Bath. What it looked like. What the problems were. What it felt like when a building like that began to come back. And she told him about the old stone walls and the cracked plaster and the windows that let in the most extraordinary light once you cleared away the grime. She told him about the feeling of standing in a space that had been neglected for years and seeing what it could be again. She talked about it with the kind of ease and warmth that comes when someone is listening, really listening, and it matters. When she walked out into the March afternoon afterward, the river was bright and the air was cold and clean. She put her hands in her pockets and walked for a while before catching the train. She thought about the letter in her drawer. She thought about the oak tree at Ashmore, rooted in something nobody could see. She thought about all the mornings she had stood at that kitchen window and tilted her chin at the ceiling. She did not know what came next. She was not sure she needed to know. What she knew was this: she was building something now, not maintaining it, not holding it up, not quietly making sure it did not fall apart around someone else. Building it, from the ground, in her own way, at her own pace. She had waited 7 years to be seen. It turned out that the person who most needed to see her, first, was herself. And in the end, that was enough to begin. The end.